see. Kind of the liberation of Italy, in other words.
Yeah. We fought from the tip of Italy clear up to the French border at Milano.
Okay, yeah.
When the war was ended, that's where we were at. We were up at Milano.
Don Herrman was drafted into the Army in February 1942 at the age of 24. He was sent to Cook's and Baker's School and served as a mess sergeant in Italy.
I was in a replacement depot over there when Roosevelt died, and they had a small plane to come in. We called it the Flying Draft Board, and they'd take 50 or 60 at a time depending on their spec number, and you didn't know whether you'd be on this one or the next one. And when Roosevelt died, we had a captain there for commander, and no one in the whole outfit knew who his vice president was. He'd been in office so long, and finally we got over the radio that it was Harry Truman. And that's the first we knew who the vice president was and would be the next president. Then finally I was sent to the 91st Division. The 92nd was all colored, and they were moving so fast across the Po River, and we were in the foot of the Alps, and we had to march up to the lines. And just, I don't know, it was just a matter of days, and the war ended. The Germans were surrendering. They were hauling them home with a semi-load, standing up, because they could get more in the semi that way, and they didn't have the transportation to move us up. And then I wound up in Yugoslavia, and I saw Tito, and most Yugoslav people had never ever seen him, but they had a border dispute, and General Mark Clark and Tito met out in open country, and you talk about the armor around those two men, and they settled it in 5 minutes, and all the troops were pulled back, and that was practically the end of the war for us. We were right outside of Milan when they took Mussolini. Well, they shot him and his mistress, Clara Pectetti, and they hung him by his legs in Milan, and we went to go into Milan, and they ordered it off limits, and we couldn't get in. So I never seen him, but I was there when it happened. The partisans shot him. Every Sunday morning he was supposed to have fresh eggs, and I don't remember a Sunday that we didn't have them. Everybody got a fresh egg the way he wanted it off the griddle of those field ranges. If you had a bad one, you flipped it off.
But somebody else put them eggs there.
Yeah,
You know, I don't.
quartermaster.
John, tell them about the people who would come to get what they were throwing away.
Oh, as soon as that kitchen was open, they smelled food. They were there with a can or bucket or something, and they always put the Velociniarita out in front, because the fellas wouldn't give it to the old lady, you know. She was withered up like prunes. I never saw such old people so withered up. And the pretty girl out in front, and then she'd pass it to the lady in the back, and she'd have an apron full. And they even took the bread, the crust of bread or whatever, out of the garbage cans that was in disinfectant and soap water, and they weren't allowed to touch your mess kit, or you weren't allowed to give them anything off of your mess kit, or they couldn't take it. You had to give it to them. And they ate the garbage, and they would have to run water over that a couple times and try to dry it out, but those people were hungry. I was in the bakery, in the ship's bakery. We made for Thanksgiving 250 pies and 50 sheet pies, which would probably cut 100 slices apiece. That was on the ship. We would bake on that ship. Would bake enough, probably this more than Manitou would ever use, probably as much as Pekin would use. 3,000 loaves of bread.
In one day?
I had a weekend pass, Class A pass, and I'd get a 2-day pass, and that'd make me 5 days off, and I'd head for home. And I could make it and have my schedule all made right, and I would make it back, except it was all steam trains then, and out in open country before I got into, I guess it was into Tampa. The damn train ran out of steam. They brought another engine out, poor Cole, he ran out of steam. And they brought the third engine and he pulled us in. And I'm a day AWOL now. And the first man I met was the first sergeant. Herman, where in the hell you been? I told him what had happened. He said, I'm glad you showed up. I reported you in this morning. If he hadn't reported me in, oh, guard duty. I mean, you know, hauling garbage and all that. A very broadening experience, and all the things I saw, and especially in Italy, one end to the other, from Pompeii to Venice. Had a little R&R at Venice. You know, that's where Marcus Square is. And Pompeii's the second largest church in Italy. And I stood guard duty outside of Vatican City Christmas Eve, and then went on up through Pisa and Anzio. Saw the Leaning Tower of Pisa, you know, and then Leghorn. Florence has got a lot of art. Saw some of that shipped out of there, out of Leghorn. And like Earl says, hey, you wouldn't take nothing for it.
No.
And I know I've done things that I wouldn't have done, and I do things that I wouldn't have done, just for comparison with other friends that never went. And you'll take more risk, you'll do more things, and,
Right.
and most of them have worked out for me.
Harold Herrman was drafted into the Navy in June 1943. He served as a pharmacy mate in a hospital on Guadalcanal for 20 months.
From Great Lakes, we went to Shoemaker, California, and then we boarded a Italian luxury liner they were using to transport the military personnel. And of course, it didn't have any appearance of a luxury liner other than the size of it, the decks, the number of decks, because they had bunks that were tiered one on top of the other, 3 or 4 high, and so they could get a lot of people in. And our bathroom was just a trough, and there was a couple of slats across it. We had
That was different.
a bowel movement, and so the salt water come flushing by, and that was the bath facilities or bathroom.
How many men were on that ship?
Oh, I offhand now there were thousands, but I don't remember just exactly how many. But it was very crowded.
And how long did it take you to reach your destination?
And we had about 2 meals a day, was all. And that, of course, some were ill anyway, boarding and heading off to the ocean, motion sickness, so that didn't matter to some. And I don't remember how many days that it was to get us to Guadalcanal. The training, I went into clinical laboratory and used the microscope and did various tests, as any clinical lab would do. We did have courses that one would maybe be for hematology, another for urology, and another parasitology, and then we had to fill in the read it and fill in blanks, and they were graded on those. And then
Now, where did that take place?
on Guadalcanal.
Okay.
And then we had a doctor as a pathologist that would guide us along, and he did the autopsies if there was any needed. And then we did especially a lot of malaria smears, because there was lots of insects that were that carried the malaria. And so sometimes we'd take blood tests on them and then look for the malarial parasite in the red blood cell. And you knew if you went to a ward where somebody said they had a malaria because they were shaking and sweating, and they were having an attack, I guess, when some of the these parasites released out into the blood, it sort of shocked the body. And they had medicine for it. We had very little contact with the natives. They would come over to infiltrate into our hospital area, and they'd look for cigarettes or whatever, and they were barefoot and wore just a little towel around the body, and they liked peroxide because that was something that some of them bribed the natives with because they could do their hair and bleach and so on. And we had one man in the laboratory said he was going to write a book about these natives, and he was invited to into their area, which really the divide between the service people and the natives. They stayed on the far side of a river called the Bella Suma River, and they would carry their children or pull them along by hand, and the little children would swim. And a few times, we went down to swim there, picnic a bit. And if there were any women present, like sometimes they're out on the other side of the shore doing their clothing, washing and everything in the water, the river, and if they saw us, well, then they just disappeared into the jungle, and that was it. But we had this one gentleman that made trips. He knew the chief of the tribe, or one of the tribes anyway, and he would go and talk to the chief, and I think he took him some peroxide and a few other things. And the chief said, well, if you'd like to spend the night, well, you could do so. And so he was going to write a book about they used bamboo for a little water spout to transport their water and various things. And it would have been very interesting. However, I was never able to follow up to see if his name was Snodgrass, whether he actually ever got the book wrote it. I do remember one time when we were walking to the Pacific, the shore there, there was a Jeep came along, and so I heard a, "Hello, boys!" And it was Jerry Colonna and Bob Hope and Francis Langford. So we thought that was a real treat, and got a lot of respect for Bob Hope for all the morale boosting he's done for the service people. We didn't have the advantage of associating with any of the women or having a Jeep to go to the beach, and we were on rock bottom. That's one thing I'm sure any serviceman today or wherever they're at appreciates getting a letter. Like I mentioned prior to talking with you ladies that we had this barber from Chicago that his folks would send him pepperoni and cookies, and wherever we saw a grease-soaked sack or package, we felt pretty sure there was pepperoni in there because the heat would bring cook some of the oils out, whatever. And we got to really expect Marty to give us share some of his, especially his pepperoni, which was genuine, I'm sure. We did have a little place, a little theater, I guess you'd call it, and an open area where I think they could project movies. And you could go over there and drink some real 3.2 beer or whatever, and pretzels and cigarettes that you didn't want. They just gave them away. And
Well, a lot of people started then.
And probably. But there wasn't such a thing as a USO, but they did arrange, because especially one reason probably that Bob Hope was there, and Jack Benny was there too. I remember seeing him on one of the wards. And the reason that they were there probably was because of the injured in the hospital. It was a hospital.
They didn't do a show.
Well, Bob Hope and Francis Langford and Jerry, they all clowned around. Francis Langford sang, and some people today probably don't know who Francis Langford is, but they had a very good show, and what really helped the enlisted men was somebody like Bob Hope could take off on the officers and make remarks about them where the enlisted man couldn't. So whenever he, pulled something on the officers, why the enlisted men, that was good for a big laugh or applause. We did have some ships come in and anchor out at a distance, and I don't know, maybe a half mile out or whatever. That was sort of an interesting thing. They would have milkshakes and maybe some ice cream aboard the ship. And we had some men that would swim. They didn't have life jackets on either, would swim clear out to that ship to get a shake or something. And of course, I wasn't that great a swimmer, so I never got to drink any milkshake. We had dried milk, and we made, with spices and things. Eggnog, I guess we made. Dried egg, dried milk, or something. Not the best we could do.
Harvey Kastner